That way all the folks that are sick at home can participate in today's class. Hello sick individuals. I miss you in class. Huh? Yeah, I got a number of emails from a number of different students today actually saying that they were feeling a little bit under the weather and they weren't going to make it into class today. And I'm okay with that. I really am. I actually encourage my students to stay home from school if you're not feeling too great. I know that sounds really odd, and it's probably the last thing that you would expect your college professors to say. But we work in an open lab. Okay, there's a lot of students that roll in and out of this space every single day. Definitely, of course, the course of a week. So if you're sick, you're going to spread your germs pretty quickly. Because here's what's going to happen in this classroom. You're going to be sick, you're going to wipe your face, your nose, you're going to be touching your hands to your mouth and to your nose, and then what's the next thing you're going to touch? The mouse and the keyboard, right? And so germs spread pretty quickly in this environment. So stay home if you're not feeling well. In addition, get a flu shot. Okay, we are rapidly entering the flu season. Get a flu shot. Okay, it'll help. As Carlos coughs all over himself. Thanks, Carlos. I appreciate that. It's inside. Okay, you get credit for that. So take care of yourselves. Yeah, right. Take care of yourselves. It's horrible. I mean, if you really start now, everyone gives me a hard time in my department about how kind of OCD I get with hand sanitizer. But if you really start watching people, it's kind of disgusting what we have to work with on a day-to-day basis in these computer labs. Okay. So I try to be proactive with my health. It's not because I'm OCD. I actually hate the smell of hand sanitizer. Most of them just drive me crazy. And I don't like doing it because it dries out my skin, but I know that's the only way I'm not going to bring a cold home to my family, and my wife and son cannot get sick, okay? I don't want them to get sick at all, especially from you guys. So don't do it for me. Do it for my very cute, ridiculously cute one-year-old son at home. Do it for him. Do it for him. Yeah, for you. I'm talking to you, Waddell. No, I'm joking. Waddell, wash your hands, because come on, dude. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. Totally joking.
Everyone else's germs okay. It's just special.
So back to kind of this week's big picture idea. We're going to talk about baking in Modo. So we're going to bake some stuff. And no, we're not going to bake cookies. No, we're not going to get baked. We're going to bake some texture maps. Okay. And it's going to be a lot of fun over the next couple hours. Okay. Yes, I did. I went there. Yeah. Just making sure Carlos was like the one person that was listening to me. Everyone else was just kind of ignoring it, and they were like, oh, okay, whatever. Carlos picked up on it. See, I'm like British. My comedy is like British comedy, right? There is no punchlines. You just have to be listening very, very carefully. If you listen carefully, you'll hear the jokes. So, yeah, exactly. There are no laugh tracks in my comedy. There is no pause for laughter. Anyways, so our assignment this week, our big picture idea that we're going to be striving to complete, is a whole series of crates. So once again, I'm asking you guys to make a very challenging shape. Last week was a cylinder, a glorified cylinder. This week is a glorified box, okay, a glorified cube. But most importantly is the process that we're going to be going through to extract a whole lot of information from our really fancy box, okay? So on the surface, it might seem like a very simple model, but I'm going to show you guys some things here in a couple minutes that you might want to start incorporating into your own personal projects. The baking system inside of Modo ultimately allows us to extract information from the geometry and use that as part of our diffuse texture map over in Photoshop. We want to use the awesome shader tree and materials and textures that Modo can create in our diffuse texture maps inside of Photoshop. I use the baking system quite often to help my texture pipeline over in Photoshop. It makes it a little bit more efficient. It definitely makes this much more accurate. So today is going to be all about baking things out of Modo, and a couple utility maps out of Modo, specifically our alpha output and a surface ID map to give us some really, really fast way of making very complex selections. This is going to be the foundation for all of our texture maps going forward. So if you get lost along the way, please, please, please ask questions. This is an important foundation level skill that's going to be built upon over the next couple of weeks. So if you're just like completely lost and completely just confused as what's going on, you got to get those questions answered today. Okay, here's what I don't want you to do, and this is a true story, unfortunately. Yesterday, I was teaching down at the Davis Center. I teach GCOM 402 at the Davis Extension Center every once in a while. This semester I'm doing it, right? And yesterday was the big introduction to subdivision surfaces. And as you guys know, subdivision surfaces require a little bit of love, a little bit of engineering, and a lot of skill to kind of wrangle and get good results from, right? Well, I spoke for a good 2 hours on the role of subdivision surfaces. I had a lot of fantastic visuals and examples, and I think I did a pretty good job of presenting the concept and idea. And at the end of my lecture, a student in the back of the classroom raised their hand and flat out told me, he's like, what time is the live stream going to be available? Because I'm lost. I'm completely confused on everything you just said. And after class was done, I pulled him up and I said, dude, you can't do that anymore, okay? You can't sit here completely confused for 2 hours because you have wasted your time. Ask a question the moment you have it, okay? Get your answer. Make sure that you're not completely lost in the concepts that we're discovering and covering in class. That way you can stick with us and you won't be angry for 2 hours that you don't know what's going on. And that's what it had gotten to. He was so pissed at himself that he was confused and lost that he was visibly angry in class, okay? Just ask a question. I think everyone would probably say that I'm a pretty approachable guy. You know, would you agree with that, Rebecca? Pretty approachable. So stop me right smack dab in the middle of a sentence and I'll answer your question without any problem, okay? I am the worst. I'm like, no, deal with it. No, I'm joking. And in addition, also use those additional learning resources that I've provided in the resources tab to help you kind of navigate these uncharted waters if this is new. Okay? All right, so let's just really quickly talk about what our homework is. As I mentioned before, we're making crates, okay? And we're not just making one crate. No. You're actually making 3 crates. 3 crates this week, okay? It's going to be pretty easy. You know, all your crates are just squares. If you spend more than like 10 minutes on the actual model of this, I'd be shocked, okay? I don't want you to spend a lot of time on the model. I want you to spend the majority of your time and energy on the diffuse texture map that you create over in Photoshop, okay? I've given you some really great examples of some of the work that people have done in the past. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. To further kind of underscore the process of baking, we have a small lab assignment today that will kind of draw focus to the steps and the procedures. There is a procedure, a defined procedure that we need to follow in order for these maps, because we are making texture maps in Modo, to be extracted cleanly and in a way that will integrate over into our pipeline in Photoshop. So more on that in a minute. I've given you the scene, more on our little Lego bricks. How went the UV mapping of your Lego bricks last week? Fun, huh? Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about it again today as we get closer to lab. And as always, I've given you some really great resources. These 4 videos here are going to completely encompass everything that we're going to talk about today. They've been reduced and condensed in size and scope, so you can watch them pretty quickly, between 5 and 10 minutes, and get a really solid understanding of the moving pieces of this baking process. Okay? Questions, comments? Everyone kind of understand what today's scope of the conversation is all about? All right, rock and roll. Let's go ahead and do it, man. Let's jump in. Let's jump over into Modo real fast. And on the screen here, you can see that I brought back my wine barrel. And one of the challenges that we interacted with last week was the process of creating a diffuse texture map for all of the assets or all of the components of this wine barrel over in Photoshop, right? Now, just kind of really quickly walk me through the process of exporting your UV map from Modo and into Photoshop.
You go to texture.
Mm-hmm.
And then from texture you go to export UV to EPS.
Yeah. Now, there it is. Yeah. So don't forget to select both the mesh item and the UV map that you're trying to export. That's a good muscle to start kind of developing and establishing now. So I'm going to grab my barrel high, and then down in my lists tab, I'm going to go into UV maps and just ensure that the correct UV map has been selected. Then, Waddell, you're absolutely right, and go texture, export UVs to EPS, and generate the actual file. Okay, this we know. We did this last week. We've done it a couple times already. We should start to be, becoming comfortable with this export pipeline from Modo and into Photoshop. I've already done it on my project file, so I just want to open up Photoshop real fast and show you a couple things, a couple challenges that we have to work with when dealing with UV maps over in our Photoshop image editing application. Oftentimes, the problem that comes up when we're working with UV maps in Photoshop isn't so much the actual UVs, but it's interpreting all of the data in the UVs. Okay? Case in point, let me just show you what I'm talking about. Let me go grab. I'm in the wrong folder. There we go. Let me just open up my texture file for my wine barrel. Okay, here we go. It's thinking about it. Here we go, rock and roll. And let me just activate my UVs and then turn everything else off. Okay. FYI, that's a great power user shortcut. And let me just kind of do that again real fast. If you were to hold down the Option key or the Alt key if you're on a PC and click on the visibility icon, it's going to solo that layer. Okay. So it's basically going to turn everything else off. Okay. Great keyboard shortcut. And if you do it again, it's kind of like a toggle. So it's a fast way to globally turn everything else off and then turn it back on again. Okay? I use that one a lot. So if you look carefully at my UV map here, it's one gigantic, big, hot mess, right? There's a lot going on, and I think I'm just going to add a solid color down at the bottom here. Let's do this, just so it's a little bit easier to see all my UVs, just so you can see the purple outline. So this is the hot mess of our UV map. Now we can kind of see all the major landmarks and features of my UV map, or excuse me, of my wine barrel in my UV map, right? You can kind of get a good sense of where all the rivets are based on the UV layout. We get a good sense of where all the tops and the bottoms are. That's real easy. The big circular UVs at the top of the map, those are really easy to point out and understand their role. However, what turns into a challenge at the bottom of our UV map is really decoding and understanding where all those metal straps were, right? With the resolution of my geometry, I have a lot of polygons floating out here in my UV map, and it's kind of a big hot mess, okay? Come on in, Dylan. Is there something like happening on campus today? Not that you coming in late, Dylan's a problem. I'm just curious, because like when I started class, there were like 5 people, and then it's slowly grown to 10 people. I'm just curious if something's going on. Our construction site next door is operating at maximum capacity right now. I've been listening to dump trucks the last 30 minutes. That's annoying. At least they're doing something. I am fascinated with the process of them constructing this new building next door to us, FYI. It's kind of fun living next to a construction site because I get to see all the stages. Like, what in the world are they doing with that yellow plastic? It's got to be a vapor barrier. Huh? They're covering it with rocks. So they're putting that yellow plastic down, then they're covering it with rocks. I got to believe that that yellow plastic is some sort of vapor barrier that's going to stop the water that's in the ground from leaking up into the foundation of the building. I'm spending way too much time talking about this. Yeah. Okay. So here's my problem, is decoding my UV map to understand all the important landmarks. We can get a good sense of where all the boards are, right? But what about those metal straps? How do I know, beyond any reasonable doubt, where those metal straps exist inside my UVs? Okay, that's the challenge. Now we know from experience, and we know from the model that we see over in Modo, generally where all of those UVs for the metal straps exist within the map. And it's even one of those elements where you can kind of like blur your eye, squint your eyes a little bit, and everything gets a little blurry. They're like, oh, I think I see where the straps are in the map itself. But Pat no likey, okay? I'm not a fan of this. I want to know beyond any reasonable doubt precisely where those straps exist, okay? I want perfection. I want to be able to generate some extraordinarily accurate texture maps that will be mapped perfectly back on the model over in Modo. Right now, our 3D modeling application, Modo, is the only app that really has good geometry and understands where those straps exist. I need to extract that information. I need to suck all of that information out of Modo so I can use it to help me make my texture maps here in Photoshop. The process of baking is going to allow us to create a whole series of image maps, and I don't want anyone to be confused. At the end of our baking stage, what we are going to be getting is an image map that we're going to combine with our diffuse texture map here in Photoshop. How we're going to use those image maps is going to vary on the type of image we bake out of the system. This week, we're going to talk about baking 3 separate image maps from Modo. And if you look back on renderography, I've given you a really great example as to what each one of those image maps looks like in the Overview tab. So we're going to be talking about how to bake an ambient occlusion map, a surface ID, and an alpha map, or an alpha pass. These 3 image maps are going to provide us with an excellent foundation that will ultimately make the quality of our textures skyrocket and the accuracy be pixel perfect. And that's really what this is all about. It's just getting the type of perfection that we need to make editing our textures in Photoshop a whole lot easier. So let's talk about the surface ID first. That's the first one that I think is really going to help us in the process of texturing. This is a utility map. This isn't going to add any sort of awesome detail to the surface of our diffuse texture map, but it's going to be kind of like a little map, if you will, for the details or where the location of those details on our models exists. Okay? Let me show you how it works. Okay? All of our maps that we're going to be generating inside of Modo are going to be influenced by the render outputs in the shader tree. This process is entirely shader tree dependent. We're going to be asking our render camera to look at some very specific parameters within the shader tree and then export an image map that matches those parameters. So I need to create an alpha output, an ambient occlusion, and a surface ID render output in my shader tree first. We're going to focus on the surface ID one initially, so let's do that real fast. And you can do all of this, let's just go over the render tab real fast. Here we go. Here we go. And down in our shader tree, let's just check it out real fast. Okay, right now in my shader tree, I have one render output. It's the final color output. You may have 2, you probably have 2. The defaults inside of Modo are the final color render output and the alpha output. We need to add a couple more. Does anyone remember from their experience working inside of 402 how we add or subtract render outputs from our scene?
Add layer.
Add layer, absolutely. So at the top right-hand corner of the shader tree, we have the Add Layer pull-down menu. So I'll click on it, Add Layer. And let's see, hold on a sec. I've even forgotten where it is. Hold on a sec. Did I hit Add Layer, right? Add Layer. Is it under Textures? Did I just... Yeah, hold on a sec. I'm like missing stuff here. Yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, hold on a minute. I don't know. What did I do? Make sure. So I have no idea if this is live streaming. Would someone just check real fast to see if the stream is still going? If you're watching the stream at home, for the sick people in class, I apologize if there was a cutout. The software that I'm using to send my screen to YouTube quit on me unexpectedly, so I apologize. Is that an ad? Awesome. How dare you, YouTube? Still going? I heard my voice, I think. Okay. I'm curious. I'm really curious now. Seth, I'm going to spy on you.
I don't remember where to go.
So if you click on the arrow next to the home button,
Oh.
then feed. Yeah, live now. Can you click on GCOM 424? There's one person watching my live stream. Woo! So let's see. At this point in my live stream, is this before or after? Okay, good. No, we're back because I just did that a moment ago. Okay. All right, so let's get back to it, folks. I figured out what the problem was. I was opening up a project file that I had created back in like version 4 of the application, and then when I opened it up in 701, a lot of the reorganization of the item list just didn't take. I've since while we were waiting just for a moment there, I created a new scene and I dragged my model from my old version into my new project file, and I'm off to the races. Okay. Because now if we start to examine and look at the contents of the shader tree, we can very, 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 very quickly start to go add layer, special, and then render output. Okay. Now you're going to need a couple of these, all right? You're going to need one for alpha output, done. We're also going to need another render output for the ambient occlusion pass, and then the third one for surface ID. So we're going to have a grand total of 3. You can also do 4 if you want to keep file color in there. To change our render output, we just right-click on the effect column here and find there's ambient occlusion for me. We're going to keep alpha. Let's add another one in the mix. And this last one is going to be surface ID. Now you get this crazy long list, okay? Please make sure you're noticing that there is a segment ID and a surface ID. We want surface ID. So it's under add layer, special, render output. And then just change the effect to those 3 parameters that I have on screen. You need one for surface ID, one for ambient occlusion, one for alpha, and one for final color. And the final color is just there so we can take a render of our wine barrel. Okay. You're always going to want to have a final color output in there just so you can take a picture of your scene and share your work with others inside the production pipeline. We're going to focus on surface ID initially. So I'm going to turn off everything but the surface ID render output inside my shader tree, and we can start taking a look at the role of the surface ID render output in our pipeline. Earlier, we were very quickly starting to understand some of the challenges that this wine barrel presented to us when we were establishing the location of all of the metal bands, right? We had to do it by hand, and last week you saw me do it by hand. I used the marquee selection tool in Photoshop to very quickly highlight an area that I wanted to infuse the illusion of those metal bands. Well, that doesn't give me the accuracy that I want. If you're off by just a couple pixels in your Photoshop document, that's going to show up on the model back here in Modo, and we certainly don't want to have the image of our metal band kind of curving up onto the body of the barrel and showing up where those wood planks should be. So we need some accuracy. We need some perfection. Thus enter the role of surface ID. Okay? The surface ID render output is a really, really handy-dandy render output that will colorize our entire object for us automatically. Let me show you how it works. The surface ID is going to randomly assign each material inside of our shader tree a specific color. All of the polygons inside of those that have been assigned to those materials will get their own special color. Okay? Let me show you what this looks like. So I want to go in down here in the bottom of my interface, I want to go into model single. Here's my model file. And I'm going to go into my component mode. And let's do this. I'm going to select the areas of my mesh that I know are the bands. Okay? And I'm going to do them all across the board. Do all, 6 of them simultaneously. So there we go. I'll hit the L key to select the loop. There we go. And I'm going to hold down the Shift and the up arrow key to expand my selection by 1 row. And now, check it out. I've created a selection that matches the placement of the geometry for the metal bands. Okay, I'm just going to put those into a group or a material. Excuse me. It doesn't matter what you call this material because the the surface ID render output's going to override the diffuse color value. We want it to do that. Okay. So it really doesn't matter what you call it. Just give it a unique name. I always tend to use numbers. Just makes it really easy and fast for me to do this. Okay. Now, at the moment, if you look up here inside of our preview window, we're seeing the effects of the surface ID render output. Check it out. If you were to go into the upper top left corner of your render window, your preview window, under effects, check it out. If you click on this little oval button that says effect, right now the default is shading, which means it's going to evaluate your entire shader tree. But I can overwrite that and say, hey, just give me a preview of what the surface ID output's going to be. Check it out. Look what it's done automatically for us. It's taken all the polygons that were assigned to material number 1, in our case the metal bands, and has automatically assigned them the color of yellow. Now, we don't get a choice as to what color this is. The computer's doing this magically, auto-magically for us. We want to do it magically, okay? Because as we grow the complexity of our shader network, it's critically important that all of the colors be very, very different from one another. You don't want to go in and do this by hand. You don't want to assign these colors by hand because there's always a risk and always a chance that you may have two colors that are similar in tone. So I'm going to go through the rest of my model here real fast and assign a custom material to some of those other elements. Okay, I want to hide the bands, select basically the body of the barrel. We'll assign this to a new material. I'm just going to call it number 2. And you can see immediately up there inside of our preview window, the computer is doing some really great things for us. It's automatically assigned all of the polygons that have been assigned the material group number 2 to green. Everything that was assigned to group number 1 has gone yellow. And then the red ones are the polygons that are assigned by the base material. So let's just do those real fast. Those happen to be all the rivets for my scene. I don't like having elements that are being associated with the base material inside my scene. It just makes it a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to hide the base of my mesh. I'm working with a tablet, so I don't have the luxury of my middle mouse button. So I'm just going through and doing a whole series of marquee selections. I'll assign the rivets to a new group called 3. I'll unhide the rest of my model, and we're on our way. Or maybe not. It's not updating. It crashed on me. There we go. Let's try this again. Huzzah. Okay. All right. Rock and roll. So if you look at what we have now, we have colors that are assigned by the computer to very specific polygons on the scene. We want to use these colors as landmarks. All the metal bands are yellow, all the wood planks are green, all the rivets on my little wine barrel are red. Those are very noticeable colors that we can easily see over in Photoshop. But I can't send my Surface ID output over into Photoshop in its current form. I can't send a render over into Photoshop, right? I need to have an image map that perfectly matches, and I mean perfectly matches, the UV layout of our object. In order for us to combine the Surface ID or any map that we bake out of Photoshop, or Modo for that matter, into Photoshop, we have to bake it with the UVs that we created over in the UV tab, okay? The image that we make here has to match the orientation of all of those UVs in the UV tab. If they don't match, it's not going to work, okay? We're kind of creating the pages of a coloring book, in a sense. Last week we created the outlines for the coloring book. Now we're physically creating an image where we have the outline and everything filled in. Yeah. It's gone forever, and that even happened to me. And what I did to resolve it is I went into the Model tab, then back into the Render tab. We may have just stumbled upon a bug in the system. In addition, also change your effect. You know, just go back from like ambient occlusion to like surface ID. That may kick a refresh, but I think we may have just stumbled upon a bug in this version of 701. Okay. I'll bug that. I'll bug that with Luxology, guys, because they didn't used to do that. It was a pretty bulletproof refresh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it shouldn't disappear like that. It shouldn't disappear. Yeah. Yeah, Dylan. A new render output. Yeah, so it's under the shader tree. Add layer. It's in the special category. And then render output. So the big question, how do we bake an image map out of Modo in a fashion that we can use over in Photoshop? That's the big question. Now we've already done the hard part, right? We've already done the really challenging bit of going through and designing the model and creating the UVs. The rest is relatively simple, but there is a couple things that we need to add. And there is a couple things that we need to understand. Whenever we're baking something, it's classified as a camera operation. It's going to take the resolution of our camera and use that as the foundation for the image map that we're going to create. So the first thing that we got to do is that we got to go into our camera. Okay, I'm going to grab my camera in my item list. And over here in the frame section, I need to change, or excuse me, I need to go into the render sphere. I'm sorry. The render section, over in the frame tab, I need to change the frame width and height to perfectly match the resolution of my Photoshop texture. Now, what resolution were we designing our Photoshop texture at? 1024 by 1024, absolutely. So we need to ensure that the height and the width of this future render is 1024 by 1024. All right, there it is. Now, for the moment, just ignore what you're seeing over here. This isn't a representation of what's actually going to be rendered. This is actually just, it's useless for the baking process at the moment. So after we change the frame width and height to 1024 by 1024, we need to ensure that a couple elements inside of our item list are selected. Much like the process that we went through to export our UVs from Modo into Photoshop, we have to do the exact same thing when exporting a baked image from Modoshop. Modoshop? Modoshop. Modoshop. I just invented a new application from Modo into Photoshop. Excuse me. Like I said, I'm exhausted. My brain is just mush right now. So we need to select the item and the UV map that we want Modo to use to bake the image. Okay. This is usually where people kind of stumble and go wrong. So just ensure that you're grabbing the item in the item list. Bam, grab it, okay? And then in your, here, let's do this. You can actually do this in Model. Just grab the item and then make sure that the UV map is selected. And then check it out. We're going to go Render, and then we're going to go Bake to Render Outputs. This one right here, Bake to Render Outputs. Now, the moment we choose Bake to Render Output, check it out. The render window pops up. You can see that the application is in fact drawing something. It's an image map that's 1024 by 1024, and look exactly what we have, okay? Since we selected the item and its corresponding UV map, it basically created a texture that matches that UV orientation, okay? And it basically drew all of that lovely surface ID information into a texture map that follows our UV map. Perfectly. Pixel perfect. I mean, it is a one-to-one copy now. This is invaluable because now we can use this over in Photoshop to help us build some selections. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now, as always, please make sure that you're saving out a PNG, a TIFF targa. Got to save this just like any other image that we create inside of Modo. Okay. Let's go back over into Photoshop and explore how we can use this. Now, I'm a sneaky guy. I've already actually created a surface ID. And mine's floating down here at the bottom. Let me just bring it. Say again? Yeah, PNG, JPEG. this is a utility map, so the quality isn't incredibly important. I mean, it's always important, but if you were to save it as a JPEG, not the end of the world. I'm a PNG guy. I like the Portable Networks graphics format. It's my favorite format right now. I think it's a really beautifully designed image, so I use it a lot. Okay, let's take a look at how we can incorporate this image into the mix. Okay, there's mine. I went a little bit further and I added some additional groups in here to define some other areas of my wine barrel, but this is it. This is the exact same thing that we baked out of Photoshop, just with some additional love on here. Each color represents a certain part of my model. This information was extracted from the geometry. Instead of being yellow on this particular Surface ID map, you can see that all of these green bands represent the location of all of the metal bands on the model. We now have a visual map, if you will, to the landmarks on the model itself. This is what we like. This is what we want. Okay? This is going to make our process of working inside of Photoshop very, very easy. As a little refresher, there's a couple different ways that we can incorporate. I'm actually going to delete that. There's a couple different ways that we can incorporate this new texture map into the mix. So check it out. If you do a File, Open. Let's do it real fast. So let me go into, here it is. Here's a Surface ID map that you saw just a moment ago. Let me just import it into Photoshop. Right now, this document is in two separate floating windows. Here's my diffuse texture map that includes all of my planks, my UVs, the metal bands, and then we have this one over here that's just the Surface ID. Okay. Does anyone know how I can move this image over here on the right to this document on the left? Just drag and drop. But what happens when you just drag and drop? What's the problem with that?
It just places it on it and actually scale it to the UV.
Yeah, it just places it. This is the big issue that we want to avoid. So if we just grab it, and drag and drop, check it out. It's not perfectly aligned. We need it to be perfectly aligned because in many ways this is going to aid in the production of this texture map. Does anyone know the keyboard modifier that we need to press to get it to perfectly match? The Shift key. Check it out. If you're holding down the Shift key as you're dragging one layer into another open document, it's going to place that layer, so this one, it's going to place it in the center. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and now I'm going to left click and drag over here to my open Photoshop document, and it's automatically going to place that new layer in the center of the document that I was dragging it into. Since both documents are the exact same size, we know beyond any reasonable doubt that the orientation and placement of our Surface ID map is in the exact same location as all of my UVs. Let's test it out. I like to have some data to support my claims. So here's the layer inside of Photoshop that contains all of my UV information. If I drag it above my Surface ID, look what we got. It matches. The landmarks that were on our UV map match the landmarks that were on our Surface ID. Now, how are we going to use these Surface ID? Well, we can use it as a tracing guide if you want, but Photoshop has some additional tools that really make this entire process go a lot faster if we allow it to. Last week, we talked a lot about the role of a mask. And if you look carefully here, let me turn on all of my metal bands for this particular Photoshop document. Okay, here we have a whole series of metal bands, and over here inside of our layers palette, you can see that there's this black and white image that's associated with that folder. Does anyone know what that black and white image is called? It's a mask. It's a layer mask, right? From our conversation last week, what is the role of a layer mask? What does it do? Allows you to change stuff without breaking it. Yeah, existentially. To a certain degree, you're absolutely right. Ultimately, what is it doing? What is it toggling? I love it. You're hiding certain pixels. Seth?
You can say it allows the selected part of the image to be viewable rather than cutting it out of the image.
Absolutely. It's just turning pixels on and off. A layer mask is really toggling the visibility of certain pixels within our scene. Okay? Let me show you what this looks like in person. I'll make a really quick, easy example here that should illustrate this entire process pretty quickly. I'm going to create a new Photoshop document, and inside that new Photoshop document, let's just make it 2048 by 2048. We'll make it quite big. Here we go. And inside this Photoshop document, here's another great trick. I'm just going to place an image. Let's just place here we go. That'll work. Now the thing that I don't like about place is that it tries to make it fit. There we go. That'll work. Okay. So we just have a metal texture floating inside my open Photoshop document. Okay. Well, what if I want to turn certain parts of this texture off? A layer mask is going to allow us to do this. A layer mask ultimately uses an additional image map to drive the transparency of the associated layer. So in our case, the metal bands. If you remember from last week's conversation, adding an image map is really easy. It requires you to select the layer that you want to mess around with, and then click on this button right here. It's the one with the black cube and the transparent or like gray circle in the center. So the moment we add an image map onto that layer, boom, this is what we get. Now, if you look very, very carefully at the color of the thumbnail image that's to the right of the layer, the system that's driving the visibility of those pixels has come to the surface. What color are all the pixels in that white cube to the right of the thumbnail image for that layer? What color is it? It's white. Yeah, it's just white. Everyone's looking at it like, I think it's white, but I don't want to be wrong, so I'm not going to say anything. No, it's just white, okay? Now, white plays an important role inside of the layer mask system, okay? We're working with two basic colors here, white and black. Whenever we have white pixels on our layer mask, the pixels on the associated layer, in our case, the metal, okay, are going to be visible. So when you have white pixels in your layer mask, those pixels on the metal or the associated layer are going to be visible. So what would be the inverse for all that? If I wanted to make certain areas of my metal texture invisible, what color would I have to make them? Black. You got it. Notice that I've selected my image mask. Got these cool little corner selection jobbers here. Okay. Let me close this down. There we go. So I've selected my image mask, and now I'm just going to grab my paintbrush. And I'll make the size of my brush quite big, so it's really easy for you guys to see. And down here in the color well, I'm going to set the foreground color to black. That one right there. Whenever you have your image mask selected, the only color options that you have access to are black and white. Now check it out. You know what I'll do? I'm going to add in another color here. I'll add just a red layer. And I want to put the red layer below my metal, just so we can see the effect of this layer mask from happening, or the effects of the layer mask happening in our scene. Okay, so now I'm painting black pixels inside my layer mask. Okay, so what's happening here? What have we, in effect, have done? Yeah?
Pretty much just covering up pixels on the top layer, showing the pixel underneath that layer.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd say covering up, but
just hiding them.
Hiding them. Yeah, we're interactively hiding or turning the visibility of those pixels off. Okay? If you look carefully at the image, the thumbnail image on the layer mask, you can see that we have a big, dark, black line that's running through that thumbnail, okay? That one right there. Whenever we have black pixels in our image mask, it's producing a visibility rate of 0%. Those pixels are now invisible. When we have white pixels, we're producing a visibility rate of 100%. So they're opaque. We can see them. Yes, sir? Absolutely. So if white is on, if you will, those pixels are visible, they're on in our scene, and black is off, all the shades of gray between white and black are going to give us varying percentages of transparency or visibility. Let me show you what I'm talking about. What do you think is going to happen when I start painting 50% gray in my image map? You got it. We're going to get 50% opacity. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to go back to my foreground color picker, and I'll just pick 50% gray. I know that because the brightness value in the HSB section is 50%. I'll do the same thing this time. I'll make my brush a little bit smaller. And check it out. Now we're getting transparency here, partial transparency where I painted with my paintbrush. Okay, all those shades of gray in between black and white are going to give us varying degrees of transparency. Another cool thing about working with layer masks is that it's non-destructive. Have we deleted anything? No, we just turned them off. So if I want to turn them back on, what do I got to do? Huh? Yeah, I'm just going to change it back to white. I want to paint white back in my layer mask and have those pixels return to their original opacity. Okay, check it out. Just reactivating the visibility of all those pixels in the center, and the ones over here that I just did, I've returned their transparency value back to 100%. Ta-da! Okay, and now we see 100%, well, almost 100% of our original image. We didn't delete anything. Layer masks contain the keys to our kingdom when it comes to working in Photoshop, okay? We want to use layer masks as much as possible because it provides us with a non-destructive workflow. It provides us with an opportunity to infuse detail where we want it, and it allows us to make changes when our art director or our producer or our director walks in the room and asks for those changes. We want to use layer masks on everything. If I ever catch you guys using the eraser tool, fail. Okay? Bad, huh? Always use layer masks. Layer masks are a system that extend to every layer or at every level within the Photoshop layers palette. So we can use layer masks on solid colors and gradients, on folders, on individual layers. It really is a system that can be expanded to cover a number of different bases. So it's an extraordinarily powerful system for us here in Photoshop. You're going to see me using it a lot. And I mean a lot. I love me some layer masks. Okay. Now that we kind of have a basic understanding of how layer mask works, let's talk about how we can use them. Okay. Check it out. Let's go back for a second here. Let me get rid of this one. All right. And let's go back over here and talk about how we can use layer masks in our diffuse texturing process. So I'm back in the Photoshop document that contains all of my UVs and a lot of the work that I previously created to construct the diffuse texture map for my wine barrel. I've included the surface ID map into the mix here, and we're going to use this to generate a layer mask. Okay? That's the whole point and purpose of these surface ID maps, is to generate a layer mask that's pixel perfect. Okay? How many of you guys struggled using the marquee selection tool to define where your middle bands were going to go? I don't like it. It's just a waste of my time. Okay? There are faster ways of doing this, especially when we begin to pair these really cool utility maps from Modo into the mix. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This is what you guys did last week. And I'm sure if you're like me, it drove you guys to madness. Okay? You were at the stage where you wanted to go in and generate a selection for the metal band. So you came over here to your tool palette, grabbed the rectangular marquee selection tool, and you did this, right? You defined where your metal bands were going to be with the selection, right? And that was great. That's the way I actually showed you last week, and that was good for week 3. or week 4. Now we're in week 5. Let's ratchet it up a couple notches here. What if you have a model that has 40 bands on them? Seriously. That's a lot of hand selection, right? Do you think within the process of selecting each one of those 40 bands, you're going to mess up? Yeah, absolutely. I selected only one and I've already messed up, okay? So we need some accuracy. We need the computer to help us. This is where the Surface ID, I think, really shines. It allows us to make selections quickly, and it takes us out of the mix, okay? What we really want to do is that we want the computer to go through, analyze the contents of this layer, and make a selection based on color. Magic wand, baby. That's what we're going to use, the magic wand. There are very few applications for the magic wand, in my opinion. This is a perfect application of the magic wand. Because the magic wand is basically going to analyze all of the color values in our Photoshop document and make a selection based on the color that we clicked on. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to deselect the pixels that I have on the screen. So if I go select, deselect, get rid of the work that I created there a moment ago. And if you're new to working inside of Photoshop, that's the magic wand icon in your toolbar. It's right below the polygonal lasso, that one right there. And what the magic wand is going to allow you to do is to select a color, and I got to have the layer going. There we go. It's going to generate a selection based on the color that you click on. Okay, I'm going to click on the green band. Watch what happens on my screen when I do so. What did it do? Automatically selected the green bands, rock and roll. Now we have a system that we can use to very quickly go in and generate a selection for us. Now my tolerance is a little low at the moment, and you can see if you look very closely, it didn't select the entirety of the green band. There are a couple rows in there that it didn't do a hot job at doing. So we need to change some of the tool parameters to get the result that we're after. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Whenever we have the magic wand selected, the top of our toolbar is going to allow us, here we go, let me just zoom in. The top of our toolbar is basically going to allow us to modify how this tool is analyzing the colors that we select in the scene itself. Right now, for whatever reason, my tolerance level is very low. When you have low tolerance values, like for example, I have a tolerance value of 2, it really is only going to select 1 or 2 pixels or the shade of green that I clicked on and 1 or 2 other shades that are close to it. I want to increase the tolerance a little bit so that it can go in and automatically select all of these guys as well, because I want to select that row and maybe a portion of that row too. Okay? So if I increase the tolerance value to like 15, I think 15 is actually kind of a good start. I usually start with 15, and then I'll reselect. Boom. Nope, still didn't do it. So let's turn off anti-alias. Now we're getting somewhere. Let's increase the tolerance. Let's go up to, maybe 15 was too high. Let's do like 10. Shoot, if that doesn't work for you, you could always just manually do it, just holding Shift. Click on that row, and now we're on our way. Okay? But it's doing it for us, which is what we like and what we ultimately really want. Hold down Shift, grab that one, and we're on our way. Let's put our tolerance down to 5. Sometimes it takes a little bit of practice getting used to it. Okay. So now I can go down to this one, hold the Shift key, select, add those to our selection, and we're on our way. And then it only just takes, but a moment to very quickly go in and select the contents of our green band. Now my tolerances still need to be adjusted a little bit, but you can continue to refine the tool to give you the result that you're after and get you the selection of that entire band. Okay. So now that we have our selection made, and it looks like I've only selected a couple of them, let's go in and just knock out the rest here. Now that I have a selection automatically made, I can use that selection as the foundation for my layer mask. Okay? If you already have a selection in play, the computer is going to interpret that selection as the foundation for your layer mask when you apply the layer mask. Check it out. I got my selection. I can see they got the marching ants on the screen. So if I was to apply a layer mask to any number of things inside the computer, it will automatically use the selection as the borders for my layer mask. Check it out. I added a folder here, and I'm just going to apply a layer mask to that folder. Watch right here inside the layers palette under group 1. Boom. I applied the layer mask, and it used the foundation of my selection for the content of my layer mask. It automatically made the interior of my selection white pixels in my layer mask. I like doing this to folders because now whenever I put inside that folder, it's automatically going to be masked out and match the orientation and the location of those metal bands. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's go find, I want to open up a new metallic texture on my computer. And let's just find a cool one here. Something kind of noticeably metal. That'll work. Here, actually, I think there's some better ones in the mix. Something really, really noticeable. There we go. That's super small, so I won't use that one. That'll work. Okay. Now, when I put that layer inside my folder, check it out. It's automatically being masked out by that layer mask. Okay? The group is being masked out, the folder, and all of the contents of that folder are also being influenced by that layer mask. So I can just move that layer around, and I'm on my way. I have pixel perfection now. I know beyond any reasonable doubt that the location of these metal bands is going to match the location of my metal bands on the model over in Modo. Okay? I don't have to second guess. I didn't have to hand select anything. I'm having the computer do all the heavy lifting for us. Okay? That's what we want. This is the power of the Surface ID. It allows us to make masks quickly without having to go in and touch each pixel or each pixel in each layer inside of our Photoshop document. Kind of makes sense? Powerful. Extraordinarily powerful. You're going to find me using the Surface ID map a lot. And I mean a lot. I think it's probably one of the most overlooked render outputs and steps inside of the texturing process in Modo. It really is quite powerful. I want to make my time in Photoshop as efficient as I can. Because if you think about it, every object in a game has to be textured by hand. It's not a computer automatically doing it for you. It is hand textured. Okay? If you're an environment artist, you have a couple hundred models that you now have to texture by hand. Okay? If you spend a day on each texture, which is I think a reasonable amount of time, 8 hours on a texture, that's probably overkill, way overkill. Okay? If you have 200 of these things to make, how many days are you going to be working on just the textures? 200 days. Okay? That's a lot of texturing. It's a lot of texturing. So we want to make the time inside of Photoshop go as fast as we can. I don't want to spend 8 hours on a texture. I want to spend 4 hours on a texture. And now I've reduced my production time on creating the diffuse texture map in half. So instead of 200 days, it's now taking me 100 days, 3 months. Selected? Yeah. So whenever you add a layer mask, it's going to use any selected pixels as the foundation for that layer mask. So I created a group. I'm a big, big, big fan of groups. I really am. Check it out. Let me just kind of get it back to where we had it. Let's grab the magic wand tool. Just make my selection real fast. There we go. So here's my selection. I know it's kind of hard to see on the screen, so I apologize. Now I'm going to go into my layers palette, and I'm a big fan of groups, which is the little folder icons in the bottom right-hand corner. That's going to add a folder, okay? And there it is. There's my folder. It's called Group 1. Okay. Since I have a selection and my folder selected, when I apply my layer mask, check it out. Here's my layer mask. When I apply my layer mask, it's automatically going to use that selection as the content of the layer mask. So wherever it was selected is automatically going to flood those pixels with white on the layer mask. Everything else is going to be black. Yeah. So you don't have to mask layers. You shouldn't have to mask layers. You want to mask groups. That way, whatever goes into the folder is going to get masked out automatically. Let me show you what that looks like, just in case you're a little confused by that idea. So I'm going to put my metallic texture in that group. Okay. Just drag and drop it into the folder, and boom, you can see that it's automatically just been masked out by the folder that it's in. Maybe I want the top 2 or 3 bands to be this kind of galvanized look, but I want the other bands to be something else. I want it to look like that for whatever reason. Okay? So if I put that image into the folder, it automatically masks it for us. And now I just need to position it in a place that gives me the effect that I'm after. I'm just moving this image, by the way. Nothing fancy here. Yeah. Pretty cool, huh? It just makes working this out of Photoshop go a whole lot faster and a whole lot easier. We want to spend our time in Photoshop painting details, not roughing out basic forms and basic shapes. The basic texturing stage is made a whole lot faster if we include surface ID and layer masks into the mix. Questions? All right, I've been yakking for over an hour. Let's just take a short little break, okay? And then we'll talk about how to work with ambient occlusion maps coming up. Yeah. Alrighty, folks, let's get back to it, shall we? All right. So we've been spending a lot of time inside of Photoshop, and I want to spend some time talking about the role of the ambient occlusion pass. Surface ID is a utility map that's going to help make selections easier for us in Photoshop. It's going to help making group masks and layer masks a whole lot easier. So it really doesn't add any detail or quality to our diffuse texture map here in Photoshop. The ambient occlusion map, however, is one of those maps that's absolutely going to give us some texture information that will ultimately make our model files look awesome. Okay, check it out. The ambient occlusion pass is one of my favorites. It's one of those passes that we've been using for a long, long time. And if you look at the sample down here in renderography, you can see that the ambient occlusion pass is really going to generate the illusion of small little, chunks of dirt and dirt accumulation in all the crevices and corners along the map or along the object itself. Okay, all of this shadow information is generated by the geometry in the scene. Okay. So we can use this to our advantage to create the illusion of really high resolution objects, okay? We can create the illusion of individual boards on the texture map, okay? Let me show you how this works. I'm going to open up my crate file that I used to generate all three of these images on the scene itself. Okay, let me get out of here. And just happen to have my wood crate project going. Boom, here it is. Okay. All right, so there's my wood crate. Pretty cool, huh? And if you look very, very carefully, you can see the inclusion of just the illusion, if you will, of individual planks. They run vertically along each one of my boards here, okay? And it looks pretty good. That subtle little inclusion of dirt and grime is adding a lot of surface detail into the model itself. I didn't paint any of that. It was generated by the ambient occlusion map. The AO map, as it's called, is going to quickly give us the illusion of dirt and grime and a little bit of reality. It's really easy to make, and if we strategically apply the AO map to our model, we can get some pretty cool, stellar results fast and easily, okay? Because I don't want necessarily have to paint all this stuff. I want to use texture information that we extract from Modo to do it for me. Now, because I'm trying to extract information about individual planks and boards, I went ahead and I modeled individual planks and boards, okay? So let's take a step back for a second and talk about this process. I have a low resolution version of my mesh and a high resolution version of my mesh. They're identical in size, scale, and proportion. The only thing that's different between the high and the low are the details. If we examine the low, and let me just turn off the object. Here's my low resolution version. This is the actual chunk of geometry that's going to go over into my game engine, because I'm not going to throw, a 2,000 polygon mesh over into my game engine. I'm not going to do that, right? That's a lot of polygons for our game engine to manage and calculate for a crate, okay? No, I'm not going to do that. That's bad form. We need to optimize our scene so that we take advantage of all the resources on our computer. I think this mesh is what? It is 78 polygons. That's okay. I can deal with the 78 polygon crate. But I want to get all that lovely texture information from the high resolution one. Okay? Often, whenever I'm modeling something for a game, I create the low resolution one first. I UV map it first. Okay? And then I can go back in and make a higher resolution version of that mesh that will help me in the texturing of my low res. Okay? Let's talk about the UV mapping of this, okay? There's some strategies here that you need to be aware of. Here's my UVs for my low resolution. Okay, there it is. Now, if you look carefully here, what have I done to all of my UVs? Look at their orientation and placement inside the positive UV quadrant. They're separated all out, right? I want to have the ability to provide each side of my cube or my crate with its own unique texture, okay? I've intelligently packed all of these items inside of their own kind of side, if you will. Here's the center, oops. There's the center of my object. Okay, I have one panel. So each panel has its own separate discontiguous piece in the mesh itself. And then if we expand out by one layer, you can see that each frame, if you will, has its own section and its own discontiguous piece inside the UVs. Okay? This is just one strategy on how we can connect all these pieces together. Okay? This is the product. Let's talk about how we get to this product. Our cube is derived up of a number of basic simple surfaces, right? Ultimately, what tool should we be looking to use to create the UVs for our crate here? Project from view, man, absolutely. I'm going to create a new UV map, just so I don't mess up the one that I have. Okay, and project from view really is our guy. It's our favorite one. It's going to give us the best results. However, we want to be a little bit careful when we're doing this. Okay, I like to work in sections, so I'm going to start. Just let me grab. Oops, this. I'm going to grab all of these guys. What is going on? Just going to grab all of these polygons. And I'm going to hide the rest, Shift H. So those are the polygons that I'm going to ask the computer to work with, or to work on generating UV islands for me. Okay. If you do this methodically, one side at a time, it's not so bad because it's the exact same thing 6 separate times. Don't try to unwrap your entire model all at once. I think I saw B and Seth and a couple other people utilizing the Atlas projection type. That's dangerous when you're doing the entire mesh all at once. The Atlas projection type is pretty cool, and it can be extraordinarily powerful when you're doing it, when you're isolating it. Okay? What the Atlas projection type is going to do, it's going to go through and it's going to analyze every single plane along your mesh, and it's going to try to generate a discrete UV island for that plane auto-magically. So you don't have any control over how it does it. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Select it, UV projection tool. The UV projection tool, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, is going to basically go in and apply some global rules when generating the UVs. It's kind of similar to the texture locator projection type. So we don't want use spherical. You can use Atlas. Atlas is pretty cool. And then once you click inside the positive UV quadrant, UV information is automatically going to be generated. Now look what it did for me automatically. It discovered that there's one plane here. Excuse me, I got something in my throat. Okay, so if you look at what it did for me, it went in, it analyzed my selection, and it generated UV islands for me. Okay, now some of these are really good, some of them are really usable. Okay. It made my life a whole lot easier to a certain degree. I like having the entire frame, if you will, the front face frame of my crate be on its own UV. That way I'm not going to see any visible seams in there. Here's that center panel already kind of divided out in its own section. Okay, pretty cool, rock and roll. And then each one of these are those little interior pieces. Now here's my big beef with the UV projection tool in general. It's not going to honor the size, scale, and proportions of the original polygons when generating the UVs. Look at the UV islands for those interior pieces. Okay, check out these guys. Look at these guys here. They match the size, scale, and proportion of their 3D counterpart? No. Okay. Their 3D counterparts are much taller in shape. So they're kind of short and squishy on the UVs. This is going to cause some distortions, and ultimately at the end of the day, we want all this stuff to match, okay, as much as we can. So it's a blessing and a curse. It gives us some UVs quickly, but we really have to look at those UVs and make some judgment calls, okay? We want all of our UVs to match in size, scale, and proportion to each other. So luckily for us, there's a couple ways that we can very quickly get them into the correct size, scale, and proportions. They're probably close, okay? They're probably close. So let's talk about how we can take these rough UV islands and get them to where we need them to be. Now there's nothing that says you can't select them and scale them up and kind of do it manually. I think that's fine. I'm a big fan of having the entirety of my mesh already in a texture map. So I'm going to go in and just apply my UV checker, my favorite UV checker, to the entire thing. And I'm going to load in the appropriate texture map. There we go. So I can see the quality of my work up here in front of me on screen. Okay. So if we look carefully here, rock and roll, things are looking pretty well. The center polygon looks perfect. The frame looks perfect. But I want you to look at the size of the cubes. Look at the size of the cubes along the frame of my crate and that interior center polygon. Are they the same size? No, the texture is a different size. And you can easily see that by looking at the size of the black cube in the CO5 section in comparison to the size of the green cube in the HO3. So that means the UVs are of different sizes. Okay? We need to change that. We need to get them into the same size as fast as humanly possible, especially for these guys in here, okay, for these border ones. So sometimes what I like to do, just to kind of test it, is I like to use my eyeballs, okay? I like to go in and make some small micro adjustments here and find landmarks, okay? If you look at what I've done here on my screen, I've lined up the top of this AO1 or something dark blue cube here with the top of this one over here, and you can see that they're different sizes. So I need to fix this. I need to get them all in the same proportion so that when I place an image on there, my little wood planks, all the wood planks look as though they're the same size. Okay? This is an important detail. And for me, this kind of divides the amateurs from professionals. The professionals are the ones that are going to go in and ensure all of the sizes of their UVs match each other. Okay? That they're in proportion to each other. Okay? It takes a little bit of fine-tuning, but you're almost guaranteeing that the end result is far superior to what we would have had earlier. All right. At times, however, it is rather difficult to really get a good understanding of how well of a job you're doing. Sometimes it's really difficult to see how the size of all of the cubes are influencing or are being influenced by their UVs. So I like to make the cubes smaller from time to time. I've gone into the texture map, and yet again I'll go into the texture locator, and kind of in the middle of your properties section, you have a really cool parameter here that will help us out. It's called horizontal and vertical wrap. This is basically going to influence how many times this image is going to be tiled inside the positive UV quadrant. With the value of 1.0 on the horizontal and vertical wrap, it's only going to be tiled once inside the positive UV quadrant. If we increase it, we're going to increase the number of times it's tiled and ultimately get smaller cubes. Let's just put this up to a value of like 3.0 on both the horizontal and vertical. And now, check it out. Our cubes are smaller going across the surface of our mesh, and it's a little bit easier to see, especially over here, how well of a job we're doing. Okay? Now, what is the big sin on those inside polygons now? We've increased the horizontal and vertical wrap, and we can see some new information that we didn't see before. What's going on? It's being stretched. Okay? There's distortions across our texture map that we need to resolve. The size, scale, and proportions of our UV are absolutely influencing how the texture or where the texture is being stretched. So we need to change this. You're more than welcome to do this by hand. You could go in and just move some edges around. Check it out. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Over here in my UV editor, I'm going to grab this big polygon and move it up out of the way. That's fine. You're totally allowed to do that. In addition, you're also allowed to grab all of these edges in here, okay, and move them up to increase their vertical nature. And as I move them up, you can see that their size, scale, and proportion is becoming closer and closer and closer to what we want to have, okay? And now, each one of the squares on the texture is more cubic. I have some work I still need to do, but we're closer than where we were a moment ago. editing the physical size, scale, and proportion of the UV is going to have a direct relationship and a direct impact on how that texture map is going to be mapped back on the polygons. Okay. There's also one other way that will help us quickly go through this process, because I've just spent a lot of time trying to get all of these UVs to match their counterparts. However, we know that this face frame is looking pretty good. We know that these guys over here are looking okay, but they're just the wrong size. Let me show you another cool strategy and technique that will help. We can sew UV islands to each other, physically connect them. If you think about it, what we're doing here is very similar to what a seamstress would do when he or she is making a dress, right? We're making the pattern for the dress. This pattern would, directly influence where we cut the fabric, right? So we're going to sew some of these UV islands together to increase the overall surface area of our pattern and connect the pieces. When you're sewing UV islands together, this is an edge operation. You can do it with vertices, but it becomes a little bit more difficult. So if I select that edge, check it out. It goes orange, which is the selection color, yet there's this one right here that's gone purple. What does that purple edge mean? Yeah, it's the same edge, just on a different UV island, right? They're sharing that geometry. With the selection made, I can go over to my UV toolbar, and at the top there, you can see that we have the Move and Sew section of our toolbar. Now, when I first started working with the UV tools, this got me confused. I was really confused as to what role these UV, these Move and Sew tools were having inside the larger context of my scene. So let me kind of decode it for you. And once I figured this out in my brain, I've been working ever since. There's basically two that you want to work with, unselected and selected. I generally, like 95% of the time, are going to be using one of those two options within the tools. Averaged, I think I've used like once. Okay. What these two options are going to do is determine which component is moved and joined. Okay. If I was to select the selected object option inside of our toolbar, check it out. Notice which edge is selected. It's this one over here. So if I choose selected, the unselected UV island is going to move to it. Okay? And you can see what's happened here. Let me do it again, just so everyone can see what's going on. Okay? Let me just make some visual landmarks here so you guys can see what's up. So here's the polygon that I'm going to be sewing to that one over there. Okay? So if I select its edge, the unselected UV island, this one on the right, is going to move to the selected one. Okay? Boom. Mission accomplished. Look what happened to our texture. Help me out. What happened to our texture? Look carefully at the quality of the image as it's being wrapped around the model. It's good. It's really good. It's really good. The cubes on the texture are pretty uniform in size. This is what we want, okay? So I'm going to rinse and repeat this going around the other edges. I'm going to select the top one. Its unselected counterpart turns purple. And then from my Move and Sew command, I'm going to choose selected. Bam. And let's see, where did that one go? It's this one up here at the top. There we go. Keep going around, selected. Grab the bottom one, selected, and now we've created a face frame that's pretty awesome. That's really awesome, actually. Now, I have some red corners inside of my UV island here. That's okay. You're going to have overlapping polygons in your UV map from time to time. If you wanted to resolve this, it's pretty easy to do so, but it requires the same kind of sewing together. This time, however, we're going to sew vertices. So if you really want to resolve these corners, this is where it gets a little bit more of a challenge because the vertices are really kind of difficult to see. There's one there, there's one over there. Okay. What I normally do is I select both of them. So I hold down the Shift key, grab that one, and this time, because we have a vert selected, all of these fellers in here get ungrayed, and we're forced to use with options. So unselected, average, and selected, they're really reserved for edges. With options is where we want to go if we're trying to merge vertices and join them in our UV editor to remove, some of these overlapping polygons. Ultimately, what I want to have here is a diagonal line. So if I click options, you'll get a popover in the center of your screen. And now you have some choices. Excuse me. This is going to take a process of experimentation, but look at the rules that you're applying to the tool. It's saying connect to average. So the average distance between these two selected vertices is going to be where? In the middle, absolutely. And then move selected only. You may have to turn this on or off depending on what you're working on. Let's just see what happens if I leave the tools in their current configuration. There we go. Okay, now we got a diagonal line. Don't worry about its current orientation within the scene. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Do all four corners first, and then worry about it. So select both the vertices with options, averaged, okay? And you'll see here in a minute why I said don't worry about those really weird diagonal lines, because they kind of resolve themselves as you work your way around the model. There it is. Now they're all straight. Okay? Let's look at our model, see what's happened. Not exactly what I was hoping for. It's going to happen. And that was the lesson I was trying to, I want to scale them down here in the center. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you do, they're always going to be a diagonal. Okay? At times, overlapping polygons are what you're going to have to deal with. Okay? Because right now, if this is a wood plank, the grain would be diagonal. Okay? We don't want it to be diagonal. We still want it to be perfectly vertical across all the geometry. So don't be afraid of some overlapping polygons. Like I've said before, good 3D modelers are like good chess players. You have to think 8 or 9 steps ahead and understand that what we do on step 8 is going to influence what we're able to do on step 42. Excuse me, my shoe came untied. Okay. So I kind of did this exact same process over and over and over again until I was done. There we go. Things are looking pretty good. And what I ended up with on my UV map is that guy right there. So that's my final product for the UV islands for my little crate. Very, very simple. The move and sew commands are going to help you, generate some really good, accurate UVs without a lot of distortions in them. Just look at what you're making and how the tools are influencing the quality of the texture as it's being wrapped around your object. Okay. So when you're working inside this baking pipeline, you kind of want to get to the end of your low resolution stage as fast as you possibly can. Okay? As fast as you possibly can. I'm done with my low resolution object. This is perfect. I got good UVs, good model. I've checked them all. Rock and roll. This is what I want to have at the conclusion of this stage. Now that I have these wonderful UVs, we can extend our model to create some resolution, some geometry that we can extract in our ambient occlusion map. I wanted to have the illusion of individual boards on the interior of my model. Okay. So I went through, I duplicated my mesh item, and you need to duplicate it, okay? This is an important distinction. I duplicated my mesh object. I renamed it high, okay? I renamed it high. Shoot, let's just do it real fast. Let's delete it. I'll duplicate my mesh object, duplicate it. I'll rename this high, and now, not hue, here we go. Now, check it out. Whenever we duplicate something, its UVs are going to come along for the ride. So on this new mesh item, I don't have to go back in and completely re-UV map this guy. I can add more information to this object, and all those UVs are going to be updated at the exact same time. Case in point, let me show you what I'm talking about. I want to add the illusion of small little planks and boards on the interior of my model. Here's an old school trick that I've been doing forever. Check it out. I want to grab each one of these faces, and I'm going to disconnect them from the cube just by doing a simple edit, cut, edit, paste. Okay, I just basically pasted, I cut them from their mesh, and then I pasted them back in to into their original position. Now what we've done here is I've made this completely disconnected from the rest of the body. Okay, so each one of these faces is floating, if you will, inside of my crate, which is great because now I can edit them independently from the rest of the frame, if you will. Check it out. I want to grab this one, do a little loop slice action, count of 1 here, mode of uniform. So it's right smack dab in the center. There it is. And now I have a center line. Now, if I loop slice the opposite direction, here we go. I can create the illusion of a whole series of boards where I got like 7 or 8 boards in there now. And you can vary their sizes. That's pretty good. Huzzah. I no longer need that center line, so I'm going to delete it. And here's Pat's old school trick. I've been doing this forever. Okay, if you grab all of those edges in here, okay, you can bevel them. Do a little edge bevel. Do a little edge bevel action. I love it. Something like that, perhaps. You know, yeah, that'll work. Edge bevel. I'm at a round level of 2 at the moment. And what we're establishing here is kind of the distance between the boards. So something like that, perhaps. There we go. And now, just a very careful selection. Just select the middle one. There it is. Awesome. And I'm just going to move it back. There we go. Boards, individual boards, quickly. Okay. Now the reason I chose to slice that center polygon instead of cloning each individual boards, that is, if you look carefully here, what I've done, or what the computer has done for me as I've sliced an existing piece of geometry, it's also updated its UV island. Look carefully in the upper right-hand corner of my UV map. I didn't do any of that. That's the computer doing it for me. Okay? Whenever you make an edit, whenever you slice existing geometry, its UV is also going to get sliced. And at times, it does it perfectly. Okay? I've edited my low polygon mesh to include some original detail, and the UVs match perfectly. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
What did you do after you selected that middle edge?
I just moved them back along their local z-axis.
So I'm assuming what you want to do is make whatever you're making as simple as possible.
Simple as possible.
UV, and then when you're editing it, it'll just all this going on.
It should. It should. In certain situations, it's not as easy as that, but in a lot of situations, it is. All right. Now, if you look carefully here, we could go in and add a little bit more geometry and detail into the mix here. Like often, those edges on a board are going to be rounded over. Well, I can just do another edge bevel. Here we go. I don't care how much geometry is in the mix here, because this is just going to be used for baking purposes. We're going to extract all this lovely information out of the ambient occlusion map and apply it to our diffuse texture map over in Photoshop. Okay? I've basically added, I've modified my low resolution mesh into a higher resolution object to allow the computer to generate the illusion of all this dirt accumulation for me. I don't want it to paint it. I now have a higher resolution mesh that perfectly matches the volume, size, scale, and proportions of my low resolution. The UV maps are identical. I can extract information from that high resolution and apply it to my low resolution without having to worry about it, without having to worry about things matching up.
Any way I can get the middle piece perfectly within this? I mean, within the
Yeah, okay, so let me show you what's going on Austin's screen, and that's actually a really good question. Sometimes just positioning UV islands within your scene can be a challenge, okay? And let me show you something that I kind of stumbled upon, a strategy that I stumbled upon a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, okay? So here's the problem. Austin has something like this, okay? How do I get that cube perfectly centered in that frame? How can we do it? How can we do it in a way that we know is perfect? We already have the UV created. I'm sorry, can you say that again? But then it's going to be justified to one side, right? It's not going to be dead center. Check this out. We can use some of the additional tools inside of our scene to make our lives a little bit easier, okay? We have a tool inside of Modo called Fit UVs. And Fit UVs is going to take the selected UVs, that one right there, okay? It's going to take the selected UVs and automatically fit them inside the positive UV quadrant. I'm just going to move this little guy out of the way just so it doesn't get ruined. So if I double click my face frame and run Fit UVs, there's a couple things in here that you want to make sure you leave on, okay? First and foremost, you have to make sure that keep proportion is on, okay? We did so much work a moment ago to ensure that the size, scale, and proportion of our UVs was correct in relationship to our texture map, that if you don't have keep proportion turned on, it's going to distort it, okay? And all that work is just gone. So watch what happens to my UV grid when I hit OK. Boop. What happened to it? It got big. Specifically, how big did it get? Yeah, it precisely matches the size of our UV quadrant. Okay? Fit UVs is an excellent reference point because it's automatically going to center the selected UV island in the center of our positive UV quadrant. Rock and roll. I like this a lot. So now that we know that Fit UVs is going to get things in the center, we can do the exact same thing with that one. Fit UVs. We'll say keep proportional, okay? And now we can just scale it down. Scale it down. Something like that. And we know beyond any reasonable doubt that they're centered to each other. Old school trick. Old school trick. And of course, you usually want to do this with your UV checker on so that you can ensure that the edit that you've made isn't infusing any sort of distortions across the surface of the mesh.
You're trying to do this multiple sides, and then how would you make sure that the sides were the same size?
You got to. So good question. How do we make sure that each side is the same size? Grab all this. Now check it out. The Move tool. The Move tool is pretty neat, okay? Because the Move tool provides us with an opportunity to do things a little bit numerically, okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about here. If I put my cursor inside the UV grid and hit the Move tool, check it out. We're not actually moving objects along. We're not actually moving our UVs across the X and the Y axis. We're moving them across the U and the V. The U and the V have a scale that goes from 0 to 1. When I move things at a value of 1.0, we're basically moving it one entire quadrant, okay? So if I was to move this along the U, -1, where did it go? One quadrant to the left. Perfect. Exactly what we want, okay? So if I was to unhide the rest of my scene here, let's just do this one and this one. Okay, we'll fit this, boom. Okay, we'll grab its friend, we'll also fit it, boom, and then we'll scale it down so it's just inside the interior of my frame, something like that. Rock and roll, okay? Now if I unhide the rest of my scene, I have this one, and this one, okay? Perfectly the exact same size. Since they're the exact same size, I would do this to all of them, okay? Get them in their own UV quadrant, and then I'd scale all of them down together, okay? Or you can just do fit UVs again, see what happens. Boom. Perfect. Okay, perfect. I know from my earlier experience that there's two ways that you can pack them. You can either pack them like 3 going across or 3 cubes going vertically. So you just got to figure out which pattern you want to do and then align all your UV islands within the grid to do it for you. Okay? That's how you get. I kind of go a little OCD with my alignment. You could do this by hand. There's nothing that says you can't do this by hand. Okay? You could just go in with the move tool and scale it down by yourself. That is fine. Okay? I'm at a place right now where I like to have things just absolutely perfect. That's just my style. Question. What else? You had a question?
I just want to know, I just edited one of my UVs to get the blank look, but I wanted to know, is there a way to pretty much copy that one edited UV and place it on the rest of the boards, or do I have to do this all by hand?
You got to do them all by hand. Because remember, that UV is only assigned to one polygon.
Okay,
There's a direct connection between a UV and the polygon. You can't copy that UV to other polys.
So I was thinking, what I want to ask right now, so if I want to do them all at once, but I know they're all the exact same size, I select all those individual UVs at once, and then loop slice them and get the.
Well, all those polygons, you could, yeah.
All the polygons I want and loop slice and get what I want.
That would work, or let's look at another way, okay? If you don't want to do all of them, let's think a little bit outside the box here. I have one done, okay? What if I just duplicate that one?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to
Yeah.
find out how to do.
Yeah, so what if I just delete all those other sides? I grab this one. Now, I've placed all of this at the origin of my scene. Good modeling, right? So if I was to do like a simple radial array, let's do duplicate. Radial array with an action center set to origin. Let's see. There we go. Boom, boom, boom. There they are. Perfect. Okay. And then these guys here in the center, we'll do the exact same thing. We'll do another radial array. But this time I'm gonna do a count of 2, and I'll do around the x-axis, I think. Oops, I forgot to change my action center. Excuse me. There we go. Let's do around the z, or maybe the x. Oh, come on, Pat. Okay, I'm getting lazy. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm just, oops. Yeah, no, this is me winning because I like to win. I'm just going to go edit, copy, edit, paste, fire off the rotation tool, rotate at 90 degrees. I win. Awesome. Do the same thing. Copy, paste, rotate it. This time I'll rotate it 180 degrees. I win. There's all my UVs. Done. Okay. Yeah, because whenever you duplicate your polygons, the UVs are also going to be duplicated.
So just delete the other ones that aren't changed yet, and copy and paste the edit one, and then.
Yeah, you have a couple different strategies there. You got it. A couple different ways of getting to the exact same thing. Is this computer like burning in front of me? It smells like it's like about to die. Like it smells like popcorn. That usually is bad for electrical things. And I hope that computer isn't about to be nuked. Awesome. Okay, questions on what we've talked about. So I want to get to the actual baking of the ambient occlusion. Wouldn't the vertices be disconnected? Hold on a sec. Yeah. I couldn't understand you, Carlos.
Rather than the whole crate being one bench item.
Yeah, and that's fine for the high resolution, and that's fine. That's fine, because all we care about in the high resolution one, shoot, even for the game ready one, the low polygon one, are the UVs and what it looks like. I think it's, to some fault of my own, people are starting to think that you have to have everything be connected. It doesn't have to be that way. If things are unconnected, if it's not one contiguous polygon, you get some advantages in there. I can now isolate sections of my mesh, increase the amount of resolution and detail in just that one section, and not have it influence the other parts of my model.
So you can just leave it all unconnected.
That's fine. Just different pieces. And here's the big picture idea on that note. If it renders correctly, we're good. Okay? We're good. As long as it renders correctly. I ultimately don't care how it's constructed, as long as it renders correctly. Okay. So let's talk about the ambient occlusion map. Okay, so here's my crate back in its original configuration. I have my high resolution and then my low resolution. Now what I'm going to do, since the UVs match each other, they're in the exact same location, okay? We have 2 pages of our coloring book that are identical. If we were to hold them on top of each other, the lines would completely match, okay? Any information that I bake on the high resolution one should absolutely work on the low resolution. Okay? So with my high resolution mesh selected in the scene, I'm going to go through the exact same process that I did a moment ago when I baked out my surface ID. I'm going to select my crate, my high resolution one, make sure that its UV map is selected, and then let's explore how I've set up my shader tree to get the result that I'm after. Here's my crate. I'm just going to turn it off. I have just one render output inside of my scene at the moment. And this isn't a bad habit to get into. Sometimes having multiple render outputs just causes some problems. I'm going to change the existing render output from surface ID to ambient occlusion. It's that one right there. And if we zoom out and look at the preview window, let's change the effect from shading to ambient occlusion. You can see that the only thing that the ambient occlusion render output's going to do is generate a black and white image that matches all the detail on our mesh. Now, where we're seeing black dots, okay, those are cavities inside of our mesh, okay, and those are being generated by the global illumination system. So that's an important thing to underscore. The global illumination system needs to be on for the ambient occlusion paths to work.
Most things that you create now, Model 7 has it.
Yeah, I think in 701 the default is just to have it on. Okay.
Finally.
Yeah, I mean it's great. It makes my life a whole lot easier. It's one less thing that I have to go turn on. The process of baking out your ambient occlusion map is identical to the process of baking out your surface ID. So if I go to the top of the screen, let's make sure that my render settings are correct. And I've gone into frame. Let's just change this to 1024 by 1024. And now render, bake to render outputs, and we're off to the races. Now this is going to take some time, but as you can see, the quality of the map that we're generating is really, really good, okay? And the only thing that we're extracting is that small illusion of dirt and grime accumulation. That's all we're getting. We're ultimately going to be able to use this information over in Photoshop to create some really cool shadowing effects and some really cool image effects. FYI, if you look carefully on my screen, it doesn't look really perfect, right? I think this is a really great example. Looks like the computer's messed up, right? Look at this, it's kind of straight and then it kind of juts out down here at the bottom. Whenever you're evaluating any sort of image map, and this goes for Photoshop too, always evaluate problems at 100%. Yeah, and we may have some issues. There may be some redraw things in here. Let's render this again. there shouldn't be any issues in here. Let's see what it looks like when we save it. This is actually a little bit of a shock to me. This may be a 601 file. Actually, this may be a 401 file instead of 701, wreaking some havoc. So let's save the image and see what we get. Okay, I just called it test, and there it is right there. Yeah, so it did cause some problems. Normally we shouldn't see those types of errors showing up in the actual bake itself. That may just be, as I mentioned, a 401 project being opened up here in 601. Earlier, I was able to extract all this information out into a clean pass. Let me open up that pass for you so at the very least you can see the product of, of your work. All right. There we go. Here it is in Photoshop in all its glory. And it did a really great job. Okay? It did a really great job, actually. I'm very pleased with the results that we're getting. Okay? How are we going to use this? Well, there's a couple different steps that we have to go through to use this pass in Photoshop correctly. Okay? Because ultimately, we want to extract all this lovely shading information that we got from the model and apply it to our Photoshop texture. In the currently open Photoshop document, I'm just going to add, just very quickly, a simple wood grain pattern in the background, just so you guys can see the process and the steps. So let me just open up. Let's see. Wood textures. I think somewhere in here I have like a really cool piece of plywood. That'll do. Not a piece of plywood, but it'll do. It'll suffice. Okay. So if you look at what I've created, what I've done over here in my Photoshop document, I've taken that wood grain texture and I've placed it in my document, and I want to put it below. Oops, it's locked. FYI, if you have an image that's locked, just drag the lock to your trash can. It becomes unlocked. There we go. Ultimately, we want to have our ambient occlusion pass on top. This is the element that's in the large architecture of things. This is going to go on top of everything. The only thing that it doesn't get placed on top of is your UVs. That way you can always see the outlines of your islands in Photoshop. So this is like layer number 2 inside of a very complex network. Okay? But when it's on top, it completely occludes all the stuff that's on the bottom, right? So what do I need to do? How am I going to be able to see that wood grain pattern underneath? Draw on it. So what Rebecca is going for is a layer mask, and to a certain degree, she's right. However, we have a lot of black and white pixels here that are going to influence our layer mask. Okay. What we're going to do with our ambient occlusion mask is that we're going to blend these layers together. Really, I want to have all the white pixels inside of my ambient occlusion disappear, and all those dark shades continue to stay on the scene. Okay, go up to the top of the screen where it says Image. Okay, go to Mode. Yeah, it's grayscale. It's grayscale. So change. Hit cancel. Get rid of your wood grain texture first before you do this. There you go. Or just delete it. Cool. Now, in there, yep, mode, RGB. Yeah, that was probably created when you saved it out of Photoshop or out of Moto. And you saved it as a JPEG, which I wouldn't historically do. Yeah, I would PNG all across the board. There you go. PNG, TIFFs, and Targas, those are really the file formats that we want to render and save in. Those are going to give us the highest quality result. So with your ambient occlusion map, here's what you're going to do. You're going to blend it with the layers below. Okay? We have a whole, if you look at my crate, I'll open up my crate file here in a minute so you can see the actual texture. There's going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of layers that you're going to have to influence, okay? So we want to globally apply the quality or the illusion of our ambient occlusion to everything in our entire shader network, our entire layers palette. So the blend modes and the layers palette really become our friends. These blend modes use a whole series of rules and algorithms to determine how each layer is going to be blended with the layer below, okay? So right now, with layer number 0 selected, this little pull-down menu here is communicating to us which blend mode has been applied to just that layer. So this is not a global thing, this is a per layer function. Does anyone know which blend mode I need to change this to? If you have a little bit of multiply. Multiply is a great blend mode, especially when using black and white images. Because when we use the multiply blend mode, that one right there, all of the white pixels inside of our scene are going to become completely transparent, and it's going to leave all the black ones. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So it's just going to get rid of all the white stuff. Boom. Aha! Look at that. Within one click, I already now have a base texture file that's looking pretty great, actually. Okay, we're getting the illusion of all these really cool planks. It's looking awesome. It's looking freaking great, actually. Okay, one click. The ambient occlusion pass is magical. It allows us to create the illusion of detail that's really not there on the geometry, but it's there in the texture map.
Do you want us to make the individual planks in Modo?
Yeah, do it. So Austin brings up a really good point. Whenever we create high resolution geometry, we have a little bit of an issue on our hand, right? Because now we're creating geometry that has logarithmically more polygons on it. However, we have a copy of that, a duplicate of that high resolution mesh, right? That's low res, that only has a couple polygons on it. Since we duplicated those mesh items, the UVs were also duplicated. So any sort of texture map that we created from the high resolution will be mapped perfectly onto the low res one. The foundations of the UV maps are the same. The outlines and the placement of all those UVs are the same. Yep. Yep. It's very cool. It's very cool. You don't want to do this until you're done modeling the low res version of your mesh and you're perfectly happy and dialed with all the UVs. You don't even touch the high res version of this until you're done. Well, excuse me. You don't even duplicate your low res one into the high resolution one until you're done. Because it is a point of no return once you start increasing the number of polygons on your high resolution mesh to generate that really cool detail that we can extract with the AO pass. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Cool. All right. However, we have a little bit of a problem here. That black background is a problem. We can't have a black background in our texture file when we import it back into Modo. At times, they'll create little outlines, and we just generally don't want to have it. Okay. So what do we need to do? We need a mask. We need to get rid of all that black background. Now, is there something inside of our system that will generate an outline for all of our UVs for us automatically? Does anyone know? It is the alpha output. So the third and final map that we're going to bake out of Modo this week is going to allow us to eliminate that black background quickly within one click. Check it out. Let's go back over to Modo. Let's talk about how we can set up our shader network to generate this information for us. So let's jump back into Modo. And we're going to change our render output from ambient occlusion to alpha. And what that is going to do is create a black and white transparency mask that's going to, for each one of our UV islands. Let's follow the exact same baking procedure that we used before to generate all this stuff, okay? So if we do render, baked render outputs, it should take about a nanosecond to bake all this stuff out, and this is what we're going to get. And again, I apologize for all the little mistakes in here. That's on me. That's on me and my 6.0, my 5.0, or actually I think it's a 4.01 file. But I do have one, oops, I don't want to browse with Bridge, because now Bridge is going to open. I do have one already open and done. I'm like Julia Childs up here. Look what's cooking in the oven. Anyone? No? Just me? Okay. Apparently I just rocked a reference that you guys have no idea what I'm talking about. Okay. Oops, that's AO. I want, oh, did I not make an alpha for this one? I should have. Bad, Pat. I didn't at all. Really bad, Pat. However, you can use, I have a previous version of my Surface ID here that will totally work, okay? Because the outlines from my Surface ID will yield the same result. So if I hold down the Shift key while dragging this layer from one object into another, check it out. I can use this Surface ID just to generate a selection. Grab my magic wand, boom, boom. I'm just basically going to select the red and the yellow pixels here. There we go. Now, and from that selection, I can mask out my AO. Boom. And that's what we want. Okay? And I messed up a little bit with my selections. Looks like I didn't select one of the panels there. But ultimately, this is what we're going to use to generate the final information. Yes, sir?
All right, when I keep trying to bake one, bake my UVs, it keeps making one of the outside points red for some reason.
Show me. Well, there it is. That's the problem right there. That you tagged that one plank with the wrong material. Right-click on that plank for me. So it's being influenced by material number 1. It probably needs to be influenced by material number 2. Yeah, so you just need to retag that polygon. All right, questions on what we've talked about today. Now, I recognize firsthand that there is a lot of information that was just thrown out at you guys, so I apologize for that. But the process of baking is relatively simple. It's almost mechanical in nature. So if you do want a refresher on the stuff that we talked about in class today, go into the Resources tab, check out those 4 videos, okay? Specifically, exporting alpha passes, working with ambient occlusion maps, and surface ID maps. Those are 3 videos that talk about everything that we just addressed, including the texture setup. That's a video that walks you through my process of starting from square one inside of Photoshop and building the diffuse texture structure, if you will, with all of these different passes. Because ultimately, when you start texturing anything in Photoshop, you want to start with 4 things: your UV map, your alpha output, your surface ID, and your ambient occlusion. Those 4 maps will give you a strong foundation going forward that will help you create just a really rockin' texture map. Okay, questions?
So, when we do the ambient occlusion map, we do the high poly version. Right?
High poly, yeah.
So when we export our UVs, do we want to export the UVs of the low poly or high poly?
Low. Okay. The only thing that gets the high poly love is ambient occlusion. Everything else, low, low, low.
Even surface ID?
Even surface ID, yeah. Although you could use surface ID for the high poly stuff. That's totally fine. Actually, if you look at one of the elements that I baked out earlier, I baked out an image map from my high poly, just so I can immediately see where all my boards were, or where I wanted to create the illusion of the boards based on so there's the low poly surface ID. Well, there's the high poly surface ID, and I went in and I tagged every other board with a separate material. That way, when I was over in Photoshop, I can create selection masks really, really quickly just based on those colors. Remember, with Surface ID, all we're doing is just trying to make selecting things in Photoshop a one-click process instead of a visual process that requires good hand-eye coordination and dexterity. That's all we're doing, okay? Because when you got 200 of these, you need to go through them quickly. You need to go through them as fast as humanly possible. This helps. This really helps. Other questions? Okay, so for this week's lab assignment, we're going to continue to get our hands dirty with the process of baking images. Okay, I've given you a short, small little scene file that you can use to very quickly go through, generate UVs for, and then bake out some stuff. Let's look at the details of the lab assignment, then I'll let you guys get started, okay? So for the lab assignment, I've given you these 3 Lego bricks, okay? And you need to create UV maps for all the models, and then when you're done, I need you to export out ambient occlusion maps, surface IDs, alphas, and then you're going to create very, very, very simple diffuse texture maps for all 3 of these objects. Each objects need to have a different look. And when I mean simple, I mean have one be red, have one be blue, have one be green, okay? But you should use the ambient occlusion information that you baked out as a part of your Photoshop document. When you're done, you're going to be handing in a number of different things. This week is going to generate a lot of different files. Okay? So you're going to generate basically 5 different things to the Dropbox on D2L. Of course, you're going to upload your LXO, your project file. I would like to see a render not too dissimilar to the render that I showed you above, okay, on the lab page. Just something that looks like this. Something that shows me very quickly the quality of your texture maps and what they look like on the actual object itself, okay? And then I want to see each one of your Photoshop documents that shows, that includes ambient occlusion pass, alpha output, and surface ID, okay? Questions? And I said make each shape like red, green, and blue. Make it like red wood, blue concrete, green metal, just so there's a pattern in there so you can see and test the quality of your UVs. I know, I'm glad I clarified. Questions? All right, I'll let you guys get to work. For your homework, don't forget you're making 3 different looking crates. Use everything that we talked about and learned today to increase the quality of your results. Okay, I've given you really great examples here of what I'm looking for you to build, okay? You can very clearly see nice, good textures that include ambient occlusion in there, that use the surface ID to make intelligent selections. So there's another cool one, beautifully designed, great job. And here's the third one, okay? Great, great work all across the board. With these selection types, or with these new surface maps, it becomes very, very easy to create good details on your textures, and that's really what we're after. With game art assets, it's not about the geometry, it's all about the textures. These techniques will help increase the quality of your textures going forward. Now for your homework, I need slightly different things, okay? I don't want your Photoshop documents, and I need to reiterate that. I do not want your Photoshop documents for your homework, because then you're going to be uploading like a gigabyte of data to D2L, and I don't want to download a gigabyte of data per student in here. That's, 150 gigabytes of data right there, okay, or 15 gigabytes of data right there that I don't want to download. However, I do want to see your textures, so please make sure you're submitting both your LXO for each model file, a render for each model file, and then I want each of the actual flattened textures that you placed on the model back in Modo, so the PNG. These are the flattened textures without any of the layers. Questions on what we're doing for the homework in our lab? Everyone kind of understand? All right, we got about 30 minutes left in class. Let's get to work. Actually, more like 40 minutes left in class. Let's get to work, okay? Gets out at 4:30. Yeah, because we start at 1:15, we get off at 4:30.